Hello everybody, CW here. I'm going to do a video tonight about some of my favorite fun rifles. I got a couple of them here on the bench and I've chosen them for a specific reason. Part of the reason for the video is a bit of a VR to a friend of mine, 3006 John, up there in Alaska. He recently did a video on one of his Savage 24s showing how the gun works, 2 barrels, and I'll show you all that too. And I had made a mention to him about his scope mount setup. He was using a set of Weaver tip-off rings which clamp on the 3/8 groove. This rifle has a 3/8 groove, this does not. And I'll touch on that a little bit here in a minute. But if you read some of the paperwork, they weren't really ever recommended to be scoped for use with a shotgun. So I guess they intended you to put the scope on only if you were going to use the upper barrel, rimfire barrel. And then I guess they expected you to take it off if you were going to use the shotgun barrel. And the reason was the guns are, well, they're not light, but they're lighter. And what can happen is the scope will shift under recoil of the shotgun. And number one, you won't get good accuracy. Number two, you could hurt things. So I figured out that air guns, some of the Springer air guns, have some of the same problems in that they're really hard on scopes. The scopes will move, the scopes will break internally. They can't stand up to the recoil. Really, it's the double recoil, backwards, forwards recoil that these Springer air guns have that does them in. But the fact that the scope moves destroys accuracy. If that scope shifts in your scope rings, with every shot or every other shot or every few shots, any movement at all, it's gonna cause vertical stringing. Part of the reason why I've gone to, and I'm a firm believer, and I always suggest others do, is to buy the best scope and ring setup you can. Base and ring setup you can. Always invest in the best scope you can when it counts. So I say it that way because if you're just having fun with a 22, let's say, you can get away with a cheaper scope. If you're just having fun with a 223 or a low recoiling caliber, that's never going to see life or death or very ultimate precision. You're not going to stake a $10,000 hunt on it. By all means, and buy a lesser scope and enjoy it and have a good time and never look back. Save for the real important stuff, the stuff you're gonna bet life and limb on, the stuff you're gonna bank a lot of money on. Let's say you're going to Africa. You don't want to go to Africa with a center point scope on a rifle and aluminum rings, that kind of thing. So what I found was airgun rings and mounts use a similar. Usually they're metric and they're called 10 millimeter instead of 3/8, but there's enough movement there that most of the 10 millimeter airgun stuff will fit on a 3/8 dovetail, and a 3/8 dovetail is common standard on what a lot of rimfires come with from the factory. And some of these Savages are the same way. Oh, excuse me. Oh man, I'm tired. So what we have here is Savage 24s, and this one here is a 22 410, and it's not the earliest model because the earliest ones were just that. They were 22 410s, and this one actually says model 24 on it, so it's a little bit later. But it's got case colors, and there's quite a bit of them. You don't normally see so many. They usually wear them off because these guns were usually used quite a bit. But I believe it's been restocked because the stocks don't match. I believe it's got a new butt stock on it. But I bought this a little while ago, back when Gunbroker first began getting popular and selling firearms. I had seen a bunch of these. I'd wanted one of these for a long time, and they were always either too expensive or too ratty or just didn't appeal to me. And my buddy found this one, and we made a bid on it, and I won it. So I paid a little bit more than I wanted to back in the day, but way less than what they're going for today. And it's, you know, it's not something I'm going to sell anyway, but like I said, it's something that I've wanted. And the way this one here works, and of course everything is empty, but it's an over-under, like an over-under shotgun that many are familiar with. But this one is a 22 long rifle over 410. And the way you select what barrel fires is with this side selector here. So pushing it down gets you the shotgun, lifting it up gets you the rifle. And how it works is there's a little sliding piece in here that slides up and down with your lever. So it comes up and it allows you to depress the firing pin for the rimfire barrel, and you push it down, it allows you to depress the firing pin for the shotgun barrel, because it's two separate firing pins, two separate barrels. And you just cock the hammer like you normally would, and it's a rebounding hammer, which means it springs forward and springs back. It's called a rebounding hammer, and that's how it works. But this is an earlier one, and it does not have the grooves, the fly cuts, for a scope mount. So this one stays this way. But this one here, this one is a Savage 24C, and don't get all crazy with the letters. There's A, B, C, D, E. I don't think there's an F, but there might be. And they're just variants. And this is a 24C DL Deluxe nickel hard chromed receiver, trigger guard. And this one is also a fairly early model, although it's a C. It's a fairly early model because it does have the same side lever to adjust upper firing pin or lower firing pin. But this one was broken. So what somebody did before me was they swapped in a later model hammer. And because these always broke, the little slide selector, they went to this style hammer. And with a switch of a lever, there's your upper firing pin, there's your lower firing pin. And that's how they worked. Upper firing pin, lower firing pin. You just set that, and you pull the hammer back, and you pull a trigger, and it would engage that firing pin. But what I wanted to show John was this mount. This is a rimfire mount. It's not an overly expensive one. It's on par with scope mounts that you buy for your centerfire rifle. It's about 50 bucks. But what it offers you is that much clamping surface instead of two scopes with, like, you know, half, 3/4 of an inch of clamping surface. This is full 5-6 inches of clamping surface. Let's throw a tape on it here. Exactly what it is for. So it's just over 4. Just over 4 inches of clamping surface. So it's a huge amount more. So what you get here is, this doesn't move. I can leave this scope on, shoot 20 gauge slugs, which are the heaviest recoiling shell that you're going to fire out of this gun, and that scope will not move. It also just happens to be set up that it's all the way back in the rings, and when you fire a scope, it's gonna move forward. So the ring is going to move forward, the scope's going to forward. It's going to be locked in to this mount, and it works really well. These earlier guns that had soldered together barrels, this one too, no space at all. So there's no regulation adjustment, meaning you've got sights on one barrel, but you've got two barrels. So you sight it in for usually the rifle barrel on top where the sights are, and then you just let the shotgun shoot where it's going to shoot, and hopefully it shoots pretty close. Well, when you put the scope on, you're in the same boat. You're going to sight in one and hope that it's good enough to be able to use both of them. Or if you're going to primarily use one, I would say sight it in for that barrel that you're primarily going to use. This gun is 22 Magnum over 20 gauge. So this one is 22 long rifle over 410. So they're a little bit different. The receivers are pretty close to the same, but this one's just a little bit smaller. And of course it's hard chromed. And this one is case colored, and this one has got a little bit of engraving on it. But they both have levers in the back to open them up the same way. And they both have, over-unders. And this one just has a scope on it. If you look close here, you'll see a little bit of silver in there. And this is like this because I had a optic on here at one time that needed a little bit of relieving because it just touched on the inside a little bit. So I opened it up and relieved it to allow that scope to work. But I've since moved it and put this Leopold on. This is a 2-7 rimfire. And it's been fine. So there you go. Soldered together barrels. All the way full length. Little teeny weeny little sights. Both these guns had. Teeny weeny little rear blade. It's smaller and narrower. And the front sight is teeny weeny. But barrels are soldered together, so they're very rigid. And both of these guns are very accurate. This one is really good for regulation. Meaning, I got it sighted in for the 22 long rifle. And at 50 yards, this barrel prints almost on top of where this rimfire barrel prints. So it's really good. This one here was really bad. It was like way to one side from the other barrel. So this one doesn't see a lot of use as a shotgun, more sees use as a rifle, but it's okay. It's usable, and there's no way to adjust anything because the barrels are soldered together. Some of the other guns, they're not soldered together. There's just a wedge in the front, and you can actually adjust things, and the barrels are actually separated. And some people will put wedges in between there to adjust the point of aim to get it to regulate so that it's on where the sights are pointed for both barrels. So there we go. These are two of my favorite Savage 24s. The 24C DL, or it's 24DL for deluxe gun, and the original 22 long rifle 410. I really like to find this exact gun in 22 Magnum 410, but this gun, there's so many versions, and they're not all the same. They get heavier, they get a little bit fugglier. There's ones with a side lever to release the barrel. There's some with a front push button back and forth like the early Stevens and Savages were. There's some with a tang like this. There's all different kinds. And the Savage 24 has been around for quite a while. It's a pretty old design, and it's one that most people care for. They like it. It's a good option. And somebody had put a stud in here, but it's not great idea to do that because this fore end is only held on by a very small screw with very thin threads. So you're better off with a barrel clamp. So put your front sling swivel here as opposed to screwing it in to the wooden forestock. This one here is the same way. Although it didn't get drilled and tapped or drilled and slid put in, this one here got a strap on for the lower barrel, which works really good. And then the back one goes in the buttstock, like you see there. All right, there it is. I hope you appreciate it, John. I hope that makes sense to you. There's a bunch of different companies out there that offer airgun stuff online. Plus, eBay sells quite a bit. And this was not a fancy, expensive one. I don't believe there's any name on it of who made it. There's no stamping on it that I can find. There is a hole through it to be able to see sights, but it's kind of low, and it doesn't work well for me, but it is there. And with all that clamping force, there's no worry of it moving, shifting, or affecting your accuracy or your zero on your rifle. And there we go. This is two of my favorites, and I'm happy to show them to you. I hope you can appreciate them as well as I do. God bless everybody. CW out.